Hospital room, 9:53 a.m. Grant walks in, hair perfectly combed, fresh shirt, still smelling of cedar soap. He went home to shower before coming here. Grant smooth, rehearsed, reaching for her hand. Caroline, I am so sorry about last night. The Harrington deal completely fell apart and I was stuck until… Caroline, not looking at him, voice completely flat. Grant, this is my mother. Grant, turning to Ruth, the smile that works on everyone. Ruth, I'm so glad you're here. What a night. Ruth, steady, unblinking, not a single thing moving in her face.
Yes.
It must have been quite a night. Silence. Grant begins to sense something is wrong. Caroline, still no tremor, no tears, nothing. Grant, I found Vivian's Instagram post. Grant, 2 full seconds of silence running calculations. Who is Vivian? That was the moment. Right there, that exact sentence. Caroline, meeting his eyes for the first time since he walked in. She's the woman you spent last night with. While I was having our children, she didn't scream. She didn't break down. She just looked at him and said the last 4 words he ever expected to hear. Call your attorney. What happens when a woman spends the entire night alone in a delivery room, nursing her newborns, building her plan while her husband is celebrating with someone else? Read the full story below and find out what Caroline did next, and why the man who thought he held everything ended up with nothing. The monitor beeped, soft, steady, relentless. 3:17 in the morning, Caroline Marsh sat up in her hospital bed and listened to that sound, just that sound. The monitor and the breathing of 2 newborns and nothing else. The room smelled of antiseptic and the faint sweetness of the baby lotion the nurses had used. The overhead light had been dimmed to a soft amber. Outside the window, the city was doing what the city always did, glittering. Indifferent, awake in its own private way. She had been awake for 22 hours. 14 of those hours were labor. She did not think about those hours right now. She looked at the bassinet instead. James was sleeping with his fist curled tight beside his cheek, like a tiny boxer at rest. Clara had her mouth slightly open, her breath coming in the most delicate rhythm Caroline had ever heard. 4 pounds 11 ounces. 5 pounds 2 ounces. Born within 7 minutes of each other. The most fragile and perfect things she had ever seen. She picked up her phone, set it down, picked up again. This was the 4th time in 20 minutes. She knew that because she was counting. Counting was something to do with her hands. Counting kept her from thinking about what the counting meant. She dialed Grant. The line rang twice. Voicemail. His voice on the recording was smooth and certain. The voice of a man who had never once been told no. You've reached Grant Marsh. Leave a message and I'll get back to you. She did not leave a message. She set the phone face up on the blanket and stared at the ceiling. The fluorescent tube above her hummed at a frequency just below audible. Someone down the corridor laughed, a nurse, probably at the station. The sound floated through the hallway and dissolved. The world was going on, ordinarily, as if nothing. She told herself there was a reasonable explanation. He stepped outside for air. He was in the cafeteria. His phone battery was dead. He fell asleep in one of those terrible waiting room chairs with the vinyl cushions. She had 9 months of practice constructing reasonable explanations, and she was very good at it by now. Very good indeed. She looked at James again. Then Clara. She looked at her phone. She opened Instagram. She would think about this moment later. Why that app? Why that specific impulse at 3:17 in the morning? She would turn it over in her mind the way you turn over a smooth stone. She never arrived at a clean answer, only a feeling. The feeling of a person who has spent a long time not looking at something, and who, in one unguarded moment, finally looks. The account was mostly public. Vivian Cole, interior designer. 8,042 followers. Caroline found it in less than 40 seconds. She did not know how she knew to look there, except that she had known, in the way you know things you are not ready to know, for longer than she wanted to admit. And there, posted 3 hours ago, was a photograph. A champagne flute, a man's hand curved around the stem, a signet ring catching the candlelight in a way that turned the gold warm and unmistakable. She would know that ring in total darkness. She would know it but feel alone. The caption reads simply, celebrating. Behind the glass, in soft focus, the particular color of walls she recognized, the pendant lights over the bar, the way the booths curved along the back wall, Aurelius, on 5th Avenue, the restaurant where Grant had taken her for their 3rd anniversary, where he had ordered the wine before she sat down because he already knew what she would want, where she had thought, looking at him across the candlelight, that she was the luckiest woman she knew. Caroline put the phone face down on the blanket. She stared at the ceiling. James stirred. A small sound, almost nothing. She reached over without thinking and placed her palm flat on his back. His breathing steadied beneath her hand. She kept it there. Her first thought was not rage. It was not grief. It was something quieter and stranger and more devastating than either of those things. Oh, just that. So it's true. She had known the shape of something wrong for months, not the details, not the name. Just the shape. The way you know bad weather before you step outside, you feel it in the changed quality of the air, in the particular heaviness that precedes rain. She had chosen, deliberately, repeatedly, not to look at the sky. She had become skilled at not looking. But tonight the sky had found her. She sat very still for a long moment. Just the monitor beeping. Just two newborns breathing in the dark. Just her hand on James's back and the 3A. Weight of everything she had just understood. Then she reached for her phone again. Not to call Grant. She opened her contacts and scrolled until she found a name she had not dialed in 4 years, Edmund Hayes, the Marsh family attorney, a man who had managed the family's legal affairs for 3 decades and who had always, at company dinners, looked at Caroline with something that might have been pity if he were the kind of man who allowed himself that. She did not press call. Not yet. She just looked at the name for a moment. Then she closed the contact and opened her notes app. She began to type. Not feelings. Not the letter she would never send. Not the version of events she would tell her mother in the morning. Practical things. What she knew. What she could prove. What was in her name and what wasn't. What the prenuptial agreement said, as best she could remember, signing it 4 years ago in a conference room that smelled of leather and money and certainty. What accounts she had direct access to. What she had agreed to and what she had never read carefully enough. She typed for 11 minutes without stopping. When she finished, she read through the list. It was more than she expected. She saved the document, labeled it simply "What I Know." Then she set the phone down and lifted James very carefully from the bassinet, one arm. Then she reached across and lifted Clara, both of them at once, one against each side of her chest, their small warmth radiating through the hospital gown. The monitor alarmed briefly. She reattached the leads one-handed, practiced and steady, without waking either of them. She sat like that in the 3 a.m. dark. Both children, both breathing. Her arms full of the only things in the room that were entirely and uncomplicated hers. Nobody came. Nobody came for a very long time. And somewhere in that silence, in the particular quality of that long, fluorescent, relentless silence, something shifted inside her. It was not dramatic. There was no lightning, no music, no moment where everything simplified itself into something manageable. It was just a click, small and internal and entirely certain. The sound of something locking into place. She did not cry again that night. At 6 in the morning, a nurse named Dorothy came in for vitals. She was warm and unhurried. She had the particular manner of someone who had worked night shifts long enough to understand that the things happening in these rooms at this hour were often the most important things happening anywhere. She checked the monitors. She checked the bassinet. She asked Caroline how she was feeling and wrote down the answer and did not once ask where Caroline's husband was. Caroline would always be grateful for that. She lay back against the pillow after Dorothy left and looked at the ceiling and began the process she had been putting off since 3:17. The process of actually thinking about it. Not the photograph, not the ring, the whole of it, the shape of a marriage that had felt, for a long time, like something solid, and that she was now understanding had been built on a foundation that shifted without her knowing. She thought about 6 months ago. She had been 7 months pregnant, large and slow and prone to waking at 2 in the morning, with a hunger she could not satisfy and a restlessness she could not name. Grant had been coming home late, later than usual, later than the deals required. She had thought once and then erased the thought. He had been distracted. When she spoke at dinner, his eyes moved to his phone, not dramatically, not rudely, just a degree of attention withheld that she had noticed and then explained away. He's under pressure. The Harrington deal, the quarterly review. She had been explaining things away for so long that the explanations had become automatic, reflexive. Like a hand that moves to cover a mouth before the person is even aware of what they're about to say. She thought about the time she had called his office at 6 in the evening, 8 months ago. His assistant had said he had left at 4. She had called his cell. He answered on the 5th ring, road noise in the background, and said he was stuck in traffic on the bridge. She had said, "Oh, okay." Just that, okay. She had not asked which bridge. She had not said she had just spoken to his office. She had adjusted the thought to fit the explanation, the way you adjust furniture to fit a room. And she had gone back to reading her book and eating the crackers she kept on the nightstand, and she had not thought about it again. God, she thought now, lying in the hospital bed. I was so good at not thinking about it. Dr. Claire Brower arrived at 7:15. She had delivered both twins and supervised the blood transfusion and stayed 2 hours past the end of her shift just to make sure everything was stable. She was in her mid-40s and had the particular efficiency of someone who had learned to move through the world without wasting motion. She checked the chart. She checked Caroline. She asked the standard questions in the standard order. And then she paused. "You've been up all night," she said. It was not a question. "The babies needed me," Caroline said. Dr. Brower looked at her. Not at the chart, at her. Is someone coming to be with you today? My mother, Caroline said. She's driving up from Westchester. This was true. Ruth Langley had left at 5:30 the moment Caroline called her. She was on the highway right now. Caroline knew exactly how her mother would be driving, both hands on the wheel, thermos of coffee in the cup holder, the radio off, because Ruth turned the radio off when something important was happening and she needed to think. Dr. Brower nodded. She made a small note. As she turned to leave, she said, quietly and without looking back, "You were incredibly strong yesterday. I want you to remember that." Caroline did not answer. After the doctor left, she stared at the wall for a long moment. Strong, she had not thought of herself that way in a very long time. She thought about the woman she was before. 26 years old. A job she was good at, genuinely good at. Running campaigns for a mid-sized marketing firm in the Flatiron District. A studio apartment in Brooklyn she loved beyond all practical reason. The exposed brick, the window that faced east, the coffee shop downstairs that knew her order. A group of friends she saw every Thursday without fail. Opinions she stated plainly. A laugh that came easily and required no permission from anyone. She had met Grant at a fundraiser for a children's hospital on a Tuesday evening in October. He was 40, 14 years older. He walked into rooms, and they rearranged themselves around him, not because he demanded it, but because there was a gravity to him that things naturally fell toward. He made her feel seen. That was the phrase she had used then privately, to herself and then to Petra and then to her mother. He really sees me. She should have said, he chose me. That was the more accurate word. He chose her, out of everyone, and directed toward her the full force of his attention, and something inside her responded to being chosen the way a plant responds to finding light after a long time in the dark. She had turned toward it completely. Within a year, she had left her job. He had suggested it gently, as a gift. You've been working so hard for so long, you don't need to anymore. Let me take care of you. Take some time. Find what you actually want to do. She had told herself it was love. She had believed that. Within 2 years, she had moved into the penthouse on Park Avenue and given up the Brooklyn apartment and the east-facing window and the Thursday friends. They drifted away one by one as her life became too expensive and too distant from theirs, not from any failure of affection, just from the basic physics of lives moving in different directions at different velocities. She had not seen it happening. That was the part she would spend the most time on later. She had not seen it. She had been too busy being grateful for being chosen. Too busy performing the gratitude that the choice seemed to require. Ruth arrived at 8:47. Caroline heard her in the corridor before she appeared in the doorway, the particular cadence of her mother's walk, purposeful and unhurried at once. She came through the door carrying a tote bag and a thermal casserole dish, and she was wearing the blue cardigan she always wore on difficult days. The one with the small moth hole at the left cuff that she had never repaired, because Caroline's father had given it to her years ago, and the moth hole had been there since the winter he died. Ruth saw her daughter's face. She set the bag and the casserole on the chair by the door. She crossed the room in 4 steps and held Caroline without saying a word. They stayed like that. A long time. The monitor beeped. The city moved outside the window. The twins slept. Then Ruth pulled back and looked at Caroline with the specific accuracy of a mother who has been reading this particular face for 31 years. "Tell me," she said. Caroline told her. "Not everything, not yet. The shape of it. Grant, the photograph, the calls that went to voicemail. The text at 4:43 in the morning, sorry, fell asleep at the office. Will be there by 10. The 14 hours she had spent in this room alone." Ruth listened. Her face did not change expression. She had learned this skill during the long years of Caroline's father's illness, the ability to receive terrible information without making her own response the thing that needed to be managed. You make yourself a vessel. You receive. You do not perform. When Caroline finished, Ruth sat very still for a moment. Then she said, "Do you have the photograph?" "Yes." "Good," Ruth said. "That's very good." She did not say, "I'm so sorry." She did not say, "Are you absolutely certain?" She did not say any of the things that would have required Caroline to spend the next 20 minutes managing her mother's feelings instead of her own. Ruth Langley had always understood which direction comfort was supposed to flow. She got up and went to the bassinet. She looked at the twins for a long moment, James with his fist, Clara with her open mouth. She reached out and touched James's cheek with one finger, so lightly he did not stir. "They're beautiful," she said. "They are," Caroline agreed. "They look like you," Ruth said, "both of them." They heard Grant before they saw him, his voice in the corridor, that particular register deliberately warm, slightly too loud. The performance of ease that Caroline had once found charming and had gradually come to understand was the sound of a man ensuring the room was ready for him before he entered it. He was on his phone. He was laughing at something. He came through the door at 9:53. Fresh shirt, perfect hair, the cedar soap he always used in the morning. He had gone home first. He had showered and changed and then come to the hospital, which meant he had made choices about the order of things this morning, and she was at the bottom of that order. He saw her face, his smile adjusted, just slightly. 1 millimeter of recalibration. Caroline, he was already moving toward her. I am so sorry about last night. The Harrington deal completely fell apart and I was stuck until Grant, she said. Her voice was very level. She had been practicing it since 317. This is my mother. He turned to Ruth with the smile that worked on everyone. The one that had worked on Caroline at a fundraiser in October 6 years ago.
Ruth, I'm so glad you're here. What a night.
Yes, Ruth said. She looked at him steadily. Nothing in her expression moved. It must have been quite a night, she said. A pause. Grant turned back to Caroline. He was beginning to sense something. Men like Grant had excellent instincts for danger to themselves. It was a survival skill. It was possibly the most well-developed skill he had. How are you feeling? He came closer. He reached for her hand. She did not pull away. She also did not respond to the gesture. Grant, she said, I found Vivienne's Instagram post. The silence that followed was less than 2 seconds long. But in those 2 seconds, she watched him run calculations behind his eyes. She could almost see the process, the assessment. The available responses ranked by probable effectiveness. Who is Vivienne? He said. That was the moment. Right there. She had hoped somewhere small and foolish and entirely human inside herself that he would not say that. That he would say something painful but honest. Something she could begin from, however terrible the beginning. But he said, who is Vivienne? And something final and irreversible closed in her chest. A door, clicking shut. She's the woman you spent last night with, Caroline said, while I was having our children. That's he stopped. Reset again. Caroline, you've just been through an enormous trauma. Your body, your hormones. The post has a timestamp, she said. 12:18 a.m. Your ring is in the photograph. The restaurant is Aurelius. She paused. Our anniversary restaurant. No silence. Grant looked at Ruth. Ruth looked back at him with the calm, absolute attention of a woman who has absolutely nothing left to lose on his behalf. He looked back at Caroline. It's not what you think, he said. She looked at this man she had married, whose name she had taken, whose world she had made her world, whose reasonable explanations she had been constructing for months with the devotion of an architect who knows, somewhere beneath the work, that the building is already unsound. I want you to leave, she said. Caroline, I want you to leave this room, she said, and I want you to call your attorney, because I've already decided what I'm going to do. She said it quietly. That was the thing that shifted the air in the room. No raised voice, no tears, no performance of devastation. Just a woman who had spent 3 hours in the dark making a list. Just a woman who had finally, irrevocably stopped waiting to be chosen. He did not leave quietly. She had half hoped he might. A clean exit would have been in some ways simpler. Instead, for 11 minutes, he tried to make her feel irrational. He paced. He spoke in measured, careful sentences. He used the word perspective 3 times. He said, I understand you're upset twice, each time with the precise intonation of someone who does not understand and is not particularly trying to. And then at minute 7, he lowered his voice to something almost gentle. You just had a major medical event, he said. Your body has been through an enormous ordeal. Hormonally, emotionally, this isn't the right time to be making decisions about.
My hormones, she said. I'm not dismissing you.
Then when is the right time, Grant? When I've slept, when I've healed, when I've had enough time to convince myself out of what I know. He did not answer that. He left at 10:22. Ruth waited until his footsteps faded completely down the corridor. Then she turned from the window. Well, she said. Yeah, Caroline said. He'll try again, Ruth said. Maybe tonight, maybe in a week. They always try again. I know. Are you solid? It was exactly the right question. Not are you okay? She was not okay. Not are you sure? She had been sure since 317. Just, are you solid? I'm solid, she said. Ruth nodded once. Then she went to the tote bag and began taking out the things she had packed in the dark at 5 in the morning. The lentil soup in the thermal container, the chamomile tea bags, the small framed photograph she had wrapped in a dish towel. Caroline at 3 years old, laughing at something outside the frame, nothing holding her back. Caroline looked at that photograph for a long time. Then the grief came in. Not in a wave, in images, specific, uninvited, arriving one after another like photographs from an album she had not asked to open. The first image was Sunday mornings. Grant at the kitchen counter of the penthouse. The Italian espresso machine he had spent 6 months researching before purchasing. The sound of it a particular hiss and gurgle that she had associated with safety, with home, with the feeling of being cared for. He made her coffee exactly right without being asked. 2 sugars. A measure of oat milk. He knew without being told because he had watched her make it herself 100 times. She had thought that meant love. She was rethinking that now. She was thinking about the difference between love and mastery, between care and the careful management of another person's comfort in service of keeping them close. The second image was the miscarriage. 12 weeks. A Tuesday in November, 2 years into the marriage. She had been quietly, carefully hopeful in the particular fragile way of early pregnancy, not announcing it, not decorating, just holding the knowledge gently. When it ended, Grant had held her. He had sat on the bathroom floor with her for 2 hours. He had not said anything that was wrong. He had not rushed her or minimized or redirected. He had just been there, his arms around her, his breath steady against her hair. She had believed in the realness of his love completely in that moment. Maybe it was real then. That was the grief that sat heaviest right now. Not the anger, not the betrayal, the uncertainty, the inability to go back through the footage and identify which frames were genuine. She had loved him. She was fairly certain of that. She had loved him with the specific and wholehearted love of a woman who had felt for the first time in her life that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. And she had no way of knowing anymore which parts of what she had loved were real and which were the careful maintenance of someone who needed her to stay. The third image was a dinner party. 8 months ago, Grant's colleague and his wife, a restaurant in the West 50s. She had been telling a story, something funny, she couldn't remember now what, and she had finished the story and laughed and looked around the table. And Grant had smiled at her. A particular smile, small and sideways and just barely visible. She had understood that smile in the moment without consciously decoding it. She had stopped laughing a half-second early. She had modified the ending of the next story she told, taking out the part she had thought was funniest, because she was no longer sure it was appropriate for the audience. She had done this automatically, without deciding to, without awareness. That was the part that frightened her most as she lay in the hospital bed at 10 in the morning with the city bright outside the window and her mother moving quietly around the room. Not what Grant had done, what she had done. The slow, voluntary, completely unconscious erosion of her own edges. Petra arrived at 1 in the afternoon. She was carrying a bunch of yellow carnations in gas station plastic wrap, and she had clearly been crying in the elevator, but had stopped just before coming through the door. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the twins and then looked at Caroline and did not say, "I'm so sorry," or "Are you okay?" or any of the things that would have required answering. She said, "What do you need?" "A family law attorney," Caroline said. "Mine. Not anyone connected to the Marsh estate." "Rebecca Foss," Petra said immediately. "She handled my cousin's divorce and she is relentless. I'll call her tonight. There's a prenuptial agreement. Then Rebecca will find what's wrong with it. There's always something wrong with them." Caroline almost smiled. "You sound very certain." "I've been having this conversation in my head for 8 months, Petra said. The room went quiet. Caroline looked at her. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I did say something," Petra said quietly. 4 years ago, right before the wedding. And you cried and said I was jealous, and I decided you needed to get there yourself." A long pause. "You were right," Caroline said. "I know," Petra said. "But so were you. You needed to get there yourself." She reached over and took Caroline's hand. "You got there." The breathing room came after Petra left at 3 o'clock. The twins were sleeping. Ruth had stepped out to find the lactation consultant. The room was quiet in a way that rooms are rarely quiet in hospitals, a brief accidental stillness. Caroline ran a bath. The hospital bathroom was small, and the tub was narrow, and the water took a long time to warm up. She sat in it fully present, not performing relaxation, just sitting in warm water with her eyes open and looking at the water and letting her mind go where it needed to go. It needed to go to the Sunday mornings, to the coffee made exactly right, to the particular hiss of the espresso machine. She let herself grieve that, the specific, precise loss of something that had felt like home. Even if it had never been quite what she thought it had been what she had. And it was gone now, and grief does not wait for permission. She sat in the water until it cooled. Then she got out, dried off, got dressed, and went back to her babies. 2 days after the birth, Caroline was discharged. She did not go to the penthouse. She went to Westchester, to her mother's house on the quiet street where she had grown up, where the maple in the front yard was beginning to show the first green of the season, and the neighbor's dog barked at the same time every morning with the reliability of an alarm clock. Ruth had set up the guest room with precision. A proper nursing chair borrowed from the woman 3 doors down who had raised 5 children and kept everything. A bassinet. 2 stacks of burp cloths folded in the specific way that Ruth folded things, edges perfectly aligned, which was Ruth's way of imposing order on situations that resisted it. The refrigerator held enough food for a week. Caroline settled in. Grant called 6 times the first day. She answered once. The call lasted 40 minutes. By the end of it, Grant had moved into a new phase. He was no longer denying the affair outright. He was now in the territory of what she would later learn has a name, a clinical name, a name therapists use with their patients to help them identify what was done to them. He said things like, "It was a terrible mistake." He said, "I've been under pressure you can't imagine." He said, "When you were so consumed by the pregnancy, I felt completely invisible in my own home." That last one. She held the phone and did not speak for a long moment, the invisibility he felt, while she was pregnant with his children. I have to go feed the babies, she said. She ended the call. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at the wall for a while. I was being made to feel responsible for his behavior, she thought. This has a name. I know this has a name. She opened her phone and typed 3 words into the search bar. Read for 20 minutes. Put the phone down. I knew, she thought. Somewhere I knew what was happening to me. I just didn't have the language for it. Rebecca Foss called the following morning. Her voice was dry and efficient and moved fast. She asked Caroline to walk her through the prenuptial agreement clause by clause, and Caroline read from the copy she had found in the filing cabinet Grant, kept in the second bedroom he used as a home office. She had brought it when she packed her bags. She had not known why at the time. She understood now. Rebecca listened without interrupting. At section 4, she said, "Stop there. Read that paragraph again." Caroline read it again. "The infidelity clause," Rebecca said. "Did you have independent legal counsel when you signed this?" "His attorney was present," Caroline said. "He said that was standard." "It is not standard," Rebecca said. "And there is language in this clause that his team may have believed was airtight and is not." A pause. She was typing something. "The photograph. Any text messages. Any witnesses. I have the Instagram screenshot. Taken within 2 hours of the post." A brief silence. "You screenshotted it that night," Rebecca said. "Yes." "In the hospital." "Yes." While you Rebecca stopped herself. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted slightly. Not by much, just by the degree of warmth that precision sometimes allows. "Smart," she said. "Very smart." "My mother raised me to keep receipts," Caroline said. That afternoon, while the twins slept and Ruth was in the kitchen making noise with pots, Caroline opened her laptop. She needed to understand the money. Grant had managed everything throughout the marriage. The accounts, the investments, the tax filings, the household expenses. She had told herself this was efficient. She had used the word efficient like a blanket she pulled over something she didn't want to examine. She started with what she had direct access to, the joint checking account. Substantial, consistent with their lifestyle. Nothing surprising. Then she looked further. She found the secondary account the way she had found the Instagram photograph through a memory she had filed away without meaning to. 3 years ago, she had logged into the shared financial dashboard by accident and seen a transfer reference. She had asked Grant and he had said it was a business account, and she had accepted that. She had not thought about it again, or she had told herself she hadn't thought about it. She remembered the account number. She typed it in. $2,400,000. She sat very still. Then she screenshotted the screen and emailed it to Rebecca and sat very still for another moment. Rebecca called back in 12 minutes. "Is this account accessible to you independently?" she asked. "I don't know yet. It may require his authorization to access." "Do not touch it," Rebecca said. "Do not transfer. Do not inquire through any channel he might monitor. Do not let him know you know this account exists. Can you do that?" "Yes," Caroline said. "Good," Rebecca said. This changes things. This changes things considerably." Caroline hung up and went back to the memories she had been avoiding all day. She thought about the woman she had been at 26, before the fundraiser, before the choice, before the long, slow process of becoming smaller. She had been opinionated. She had been funny, actually funny, not the kind of funny that waits for permission. She had known what she thought about things and said it without softening at first. She remembered the day she had left the marketing firm. David, her manager, had said, "Are you sure? You're really good at this. I don't want to lose you." She had said, "I'm sure, this is right for us." Us. She had said us as if there was no longer a Caroline separate from Grant, as if the self she brought to the sentence was already a shared entity, half of a partnership, no longer entirely her own. She thought about that word now, us. She thought about what it had cost her. Then she heard Clara making the half-hungry, half-indignant sound that meant the nap was over. She closed the laptop. She went to get her daughter. The evening was warm for early spring. Ruth opened the windows in the kitchen and the smell of the maple tree came in green, clean, the particular smell of things beginning. Caroline sat in the nursing chair by the window and fed Clara and looked at the maple tree and thought about nothing for a little while. Just the tree, just the green smell, just her daughter's weight. "I'm not crazy," she thought. "I know what I saw. I have always known what I saw." It was not a question. It was a statement. Clean and simple and entirely her own. "I'm not crazy. I know what I saw." 3 weeks after the birth, Caroline received 2 phone calls that changed the shape of things. The first came on a Wednesday afternoon. Ruth had taken the twins for a walk in the double stroller, the one Caroline's former colleague had dropped off the week before with a card that said, simply, "We miss you and we're so glad you're back," and the house was quiet. The call came from a woman named Sandra. Sandra identified herself as the office manager at Grant's development firm on Park Avenue. Her voice was careful. The careful voice of someone who has been weighing a decision for a long time and has finally tipped toward making it. I don't want to get involved, Sandra said. I want you to understand that first. I'm not calling to cause trouble. I understand, Caroline said. But if you're asking whether this is the first time, pause, long enough that Caroline held her breath without realizing she was doing it. It's not the first time. Caroline kept her voice completely steady. She thanked Sandra. She asked one question. Sandra answered it. Caroline thanked her again and ended the call. Then she went to the bathroom. She turned the tap on. Hot water, running. She sat on the edge of the tub. She had thought she was past shock. She had thought she had absorbed the main blow, and that what came after would be progressively easier to absorb, the way aftershocks are smaller than the earthquake. She was wrong. It wasn't the first time. Which meant she had been living inside a lie for longer than she knew. Which meant the years she had spent adjusting her laugh and softening her sentences and constructing reasonable explanations had been spent in the company of someone who was running an entire alternate reality alongside the one she occupied. I was so stupid, she thought. The signs were all there, every single one of them. I just chose every explanation except the obvious one. Then she caught herself. She sat up straighter on the edge of the tub. No, she thought. Stop. He was careful. He was deliberate. He worked at making the alternative explanations more plausible than the truth. That is not stupidity on my part. That is manipulation on his. Those are different things. She said it again in her mind. Those are different things. I need to remember that. She turned off the tap. She dried her hands. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for a long moment. I deserved better than this, she thought, from the very beginning. I deserved someone who didn't need to run a parallel world to feel alive. That's not too much to ask. That was never too much to ask. She went back to the kitchen. She called Rebecca. I have a witness, she said, an office employee, corroborating that this is an ongoing pattern. Will she provide a statement? She's willing to speak to you directly. Good, Rebecca said. That's very good. The second call came 3 days later. It was evening. Ruth was reading in the living room. Both twins were asleep. Caroline was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea and her laptop open to a freelance marketing platform she had been quietly exploring. She heard the doorbell first, then Ruth's voice, surprised, then a voice she recognized. Doris Marsh came into the kitchen in cream silk and pearl earrings, carrying 2 silver-handled baby rattle sets from Tiffany wrapped in pale blue ribbon. Caroline, she said, I'd like to speak with you. Ruth appeared in the doorway behind her. She had the particular expression she used when containing something significant. I'll be right in the kitchen, Ruth said pleasantly. She did not move from the doorway. Doris sat down across from Caroline. She arranged her expression into something that resembled maternal concern. She was 70 years old and had been arranging her expressions for so long that the effort no longer showed. Grant is devastated, she said. He made a terrible error. I'm not here to defend it. Good, Caroline said. But I want to be honest with you. Doris folded her hands on the table. A divorce? At this stage, with newborn twins, with the prenuptial agreement and the legal complexity involved, it will take years. It will cost an enormous amount of money on both sides, and it will be hard on those children. I know, Caroline said. He's willing to discuss modifications, Doris said, to financial arrangements, to the structure of the marriage going forward, private counseling, a renewed commitment. A renewed commitment, Caroline repeated. He wants his family back. Caroline looked at this woman, Doris Marsh, who had treated her for 4 years with the specific, pleasant warmth reserved for something decorative, who had stood in the receiving line at the wedding in cream silk, different year, and smiled the smile of a woman who had gotten the outcome she intended. Did you know? Caroline said. Doris looked at her. About the affair, Caroline said. Did you know before I did? The silence stretched. Doris did not answer. That was her answer. Caroline held her gaze for a moment longer. Then she nodded, slowly, the nod of someone filing a piece of information in a place where it would not be misplaced. Thank you for the rattles, she said. I'll see you out. After Doris left, Ruth came into the kitchen and stood by the counter and looked at her daughter. She knew, Ruth said. Yes, Caroline said. And she came here anyway. She came here because Grant sent her, Caroline said. He thought she'd be more effective than he was. She paused. He was wrong. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Rebecca needs to know about the account, she said. She already knows, Caroline said. She's working on the Greenwich portfolio. Ruth looked at her daughter for a long moment. The way she had looked at her when Caroline was 8 years old and had fallen off the back wall and broken 2 fingers and had walked back into the house and said in a remarkably steady voice, I think something's wrong with my hand. The look that said, I see exactly who you are and I am not surprised. Your father would have been very proud of you, Ruth said. Caroline looked down at her tea. I know, she said. Grant came to Ruth's house on a Tuesday evening. He called first. He asked permission. He came with dinner from the Italian restaurant on West 4th that Caroline had loved before the marriage, the small family place with the red checkered tablecloths and the arrabbiata that was too spicy for most people but exactly right for her. He brought the sparkling water she preferred, the kind with the thin glass bottle that she had once said idly reminded her of summer. He had remembered. He always remembered. He sat across from Caroline at Ruth's kitchen table and held James for a long time without saying anything. Then he held Clara. He looked at both of them with an expression she had never seen on his face before, something undefended, something that had no strategy in it. "I know I don't deserve another chance," he said. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you not to make a permanent decision when everything is still so new. Give me 6 months. Let me show you what I can be." Caroline looked at him. She was so tired. She was 3 weeks postpartum, and she had slept an average of 4 broken hours a night since the hospital, and her body was healing from something significant, and she was living in her mother's guest room at 31 years old, and the legal bills were accumulating, and the uncertainty had its own physical weight. She understood in this moment why women go back. Not weakness, never weakness, exhaustion. The exhaustion that makes the path of least resistance look, briefly, like wisdom. He was holding Clara. Clara's fist was curled around his index finger. He looked at his daughter with something that might have been genuine. That might have been real. She went to bed that night without giving him an answer. She lay in the dark and made the list. Not feelings, facts. He was at Aurelius at 12:18 a.m. while she was in labor. That was a fact. Sandra confirmed it was not the first time. That was a fact. Doris knew and said nothing. That was a fact. He said, "Who is Vivienne?" before he said anything else. Before apology. Before acknowledgement. The lie was his first reflex. Automatic. Practiced. The lie was the thing he reached for first, the way a person reaches for their phone when they wake up. That was a fact. That fact specifically was the one she kept coming back to. Not the affair. Not even the timing. The instinct to lie. The total absence of any moment where honesty was even considered. At 2:47, she got up and went to the kitchen. She made tea in the blue mug with the chipped handle, the one she had been drinking from since she was 12 years old, the one that had survived college and the Brooklyn apartment, and somehow made it to her mother's house where it had always belonged. She sat at the table and opened her notes app. She read through the list she had started in the hospital. What I know, she had done almost everything on it. In 3 weeks, while healing from childbirth, while nursing 2 infants, while processing a devastation that she had not yet fully processed. She had called Rebecca, documented the accounts, reached out to David, researched her options, drafted a preliminary budget for what independence would require. She had done all of it. She put the phone down on the table. She looked at the kitchen, her mother's kitchen, the dish towel on the oven handle, the crossword half finished on the counter, the photographs held to the refrigerator with magnets that Ruth had been collecting since the 90s, ceramic fruits, tiny landmarks from trips she had taken, a small green dinosaur that Caroline had brought home from a school field trip at age 7. I'm not going back. Not a resolution, not a decision being made. A fact. Simple as the others. I'm not going back because going back would require me to unknow what I know, and I am not capable of that. And even if I were, I would not choose it, because the woman who didn't know she needed to leave yet was 26. The woman who knows is 31, and she is not going back. She finished her tea, she washed the mug, and set it in the rack. She went back to bed and slept 4.5 hours straight. In the morning, she called Rebecca. "I'm ready to proceed," she said. "I'll file this week," Rebecca said. 3 days after Caroline called Rebecca, Edmund Hayes called Caroline. Edmund had been the Marsh family attorney for 30 years. He was 61. He had a daughter who was 29, roughly Vivienne's age, roughly Caroline's age, and a conscience that had been conducting a long, low-grade argument with his professional loyalties. The conscience had apparently won. "Mrs. Marsh," he said, "I'm not calling in any official capacity. I understand," she said. "I cannot provide documentation of any kind," he said. "I want to be very clear about that. I understand," she said again. "But I would strongly suggest," he said carefully, "that your attorney request full and complete disclosure of all holding entities associated with your husband's interests, specifically the Greenwich portfolio, specifically the entities formed in the last 4 years." A pause. "Thank you, Edmund," she said. "Good luck to you," he said, and hung up. She called Rebecca immediately. "Greenwich portfolio," she said. "All associated holding entities. Formed in the last 4 years." A pause on Rebecca's end. "Where did this come from?" Rebecca asked. Someone with more conscience than he expected to have," Caroline said. "Right," Rebecca said. "I'll request full disclosure. This could take however long it takes," Caroline said. "I'm not in a hurry." This was almost true. She was in a hurry in the way anyone is in a hurry when their life is suspended between what was and what comes next. But she had learned in these weeks the particular discipline of strategic patience. The ability to hold what you know and wait for the right moment to use it. The ability to be still while the work is being done. She was learning that stillness was not passivity. It was preparation. 5 weeks after the birth, Grant sent the letter. It came through his attorney, which meant it was official, which meant something had shifted in his approach. The letter was measured and legal in its language and outlined a proposed settlement that was, in Rebecca's assessment, an opening position designed to see how much Caroline didn't know. "He's testing you," Rebecca said on the phone. "He wants to know if you know about the secondary account. He wants to know if you know about Greenwich. And if I do, then this letter is very different from what it appears to be," Rebecca said. "He's protecting something. He's always been protecting something," Caroline said. She sat with the letter for a long time after the call. This was the hardest week, she will tell you that honestly. 5 weeks out. The shock had worn completely away by now, and the grief had settled into something chronic, not acute, not the sharp pain of the first nights, but the persistent low ache of a loss that is becoming real rather than hypothetical. The twins were still tiny. James had developed a preference for being held on the left shoulder specifically, which meant that some mornings Caroline's left arm ached by 7 a.m. and she could not bring herself to put him down. Clara had discovered her own hands and spent long minutes staring at them with an expression of complete philosophical engagement. Caroline loved them so completely it sometimes felt structural, like the love was holding her up rather than the other way around. But the nights were still hard. She lay awake on night 36 and let herself feel the full weight of it. Not the anger. She had been spending time in the anger, and the anger was useful. The anger was fuel. But underneath the anger was something softer and more honest. She was sad. She was sad because she had loved him. Whatever he was, whatever he had done, whatever the marriage had been, beneath the surface she was allowed to see she had loved him. She had built a life around that love. She had given up things she valued and accumulated things she didn't, and called the trade worthwhile, and she had meant it. And that version of her life was over. Not just the marriage, the entire architecture, the penthouse, the dinners, the sense of being in the company of someone who had chosen her. Gone, all of it, replaced by a guest room in Westchester, and a nursing chair, and a legal battle, and the slow, difficult work of figuring out who she was now. Somewhere along the way I became invisible, she thought. I don't know the exact day. I don't know the hour. But somewhere in those 4 years I became a feature of his life rather than a person in my own right. And the terrifying thing is that I helped it happen. Not because I was weak. Because I was so grateful to be chosen that I never asked what the choice was costing me. She let herself stay in that for a long time. Not to punish herself, to understand. Because the point was not to become a woman who was never again that grateful, that open, that willing to love something completely. The point was to become a woman who could love completely while still knowing at every moment exactly who she was apart from the things she loved. She got up and went to check on the twins. James was sleeping. Clara was awake, looking at the ceiling with those enormous patient eyes. Caroline picked her up, sat in the nursing chair, held her. "Starting over feels impossible," she said quietly to Clara. "But staying feels worse. So we're going to start over. Just us. We're going to be okay." Clara looked at her with the focused attention of someone who cannot yet speak, but is listening to everything. "I promise," Caroline said. "We're going to be okay." She sat there for a long time. When she went back to bed, she was not fixed. She was not better. She was not transformed. She was just a little more certain of herself than she had been an hour ago. And in the morning, that was enough. The formal settlement negotiation happened on a Thursday. 19th floor. A conference room with windows overlooking Midtown, a long table, water glasses, stacked documents on both sides. This was not the confrontation she had imagined. In the early weeks, in the hospital, and then in the guest room in the quiet nights, she had imagined something else, something with more sound. A confrontation where Grant finally broke open and said something honest, and she could look him in the eye and know that he knew what he had done. That confrontation did not exist. What existed was this: a table, 2 sets of attorneys, Grant in a very expensive suit, and Caroline in the navy dress she had bought 3 weeks ago, because she needed something that was entirely hers, nothing from the penthouse wardrobe, nothing he had approved or suggested or purchased. Just a dress she had chosen herself on a Tuesday afternoon when Ruth watched the twins. Grant was carefully neutral. He looked at her occasionally. When he did, she read nothing useful from his expression. He had reorganized himself, in the 6 weeks since the hospital, into someone managing a transaction, competent and composed and entirely in the mode of protecting assets. She had expected to feel something significant when she sat across from him. She felt something, but it was quieter than she expected. Not hatred, not residual love. Something more like clarity, the feeling of finally being in the correct relationship to a true thing. Whitfield, Grant's lead attorney, opened by presenting their interpretation of the prenuptial agreement. He was smooth and certain and spoke for 11 minutes without taking a question. The proposed settlement would leave Caroline with a housing allowance, child support calculated at the lower end of the range, and the assets explicitly named in the prenuptial, a list that had been carefully curated to exclude everything that had been moved in the last 4 years. He presented it as inevitable, as the obvious and reasonable outcome of the documents. Rebecca let him finish. She placed a single document in the center of the table. "I'd like to start with the Greenwich portfolio," she said. Specifically, the two holding entities incorporated in the 30 months following the execution of the prenuptial agreement. Whitfield's certainty adjusted. It was a very small adjustment, but Caroline was watching for it, and she saw it. Grant looked at the document. Then he looked at Caroline. She held his gaze. She thought, "I didn't fail at love. I love someone who was not who I thought he was. Those are different things. I need to remember that those are different things." The negotiation took 4 hours. At the end of 4 hours, several things had been agreed in principle. A settlement substantially exceeding what the original prenuptial would have permitted. Primary physical custody of James and Clara with Caroline. A residential arrangement giving Caroline stability and genuine independence, not the penthouse, not charity, not a situation that required her to remain in any form of dependence on a man who had demonstrated exactly what dependence cost. Structured access for Grant. Reasonable access. He was their father. That was not going to change. It was not everything. No settlement is everything. There would be more paperwork and more phone calls through attorneys and more difficult months before anything was fully finalized. But it was a foundation. It was something to build from. Walking out of the building into the October afternoon, though it was actually April now, spring, the season that had been waiting while all of this happened, Rebecca said, "You were excellent in there." "I was terrified the entire time," Caroline said. "Yes," Rebecca said. "That's what excellent looks like sometimes." Caroline stood on the sidewalk. The city moved around her. A woman in a red coat walking fast. Two men debating something outside a coffee shop. A pigeon executing a small, unimpressed turn and walking away. The ordinary, beautiful machinery of a city that had no knowledge of what had just happened on the 19th floor. She called her mother. "It's done," she said. "We have a deal." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "Come home," she said. "I have soup on. I'll be there in an hour," Caroline said. She stood on the sidewalk for another minute. The air was cool and clear with the particular quality of spring in the city, that specific mixture of warmth and edge that only lasts a few weeks before the heat settles in. She thought about James and Clara. Home with Ruth right now, in their bassinet, wearing their small knit hats. She thought about the woman at 26, the Brooklyn apartment, the east-facing window, the laugh that needed no permission. "I'm coming back for you," she thought. "I know you're still in there. I'm coming." She started walking. 3 weeks later, she signed the papers on the apartment in Brooklyn. 2 bedrooms, top floor of a brownstone. The neighborhood she had known before, the coffee shop on the corner, the bookstore she had spent her lunch breaks in, the particular rhythm of streets that moved at human pace. The kitchen had a window that faced south. She painted it yellow. Petra helped. They put the music on too loud, and Clara woke up from her nap, and instead of apologizing for the disruption, Caroline picked her daughter up and danced with her slowly in the middle of the kitchen for a minute, one hand on her back, the smell of paint and old wood and the very beginning of something new. It felt like something that belonged to her, something that had never required permission. Mine, she thought. All of this, mine. The apartment settled around her, not all at once. In the particular gradual way that spaces become yours through the accumulation of ordinary mornings, through the specific knowledge of which floorboard creaks, and where the afternoon light lands at 4 o'clock, and how long it takes the hot water to run from the tap to the kitchen sink. She learned all of it. She moved through the space each day, and it became more hers. She bought a coffee maker, a simple one, nothing Italian, nothing that required research or expertise. She put it on the left side of the counter because that was where she wanted it, not because someone had told her where things should go. She put a photograph on the refrigerator with a magnet she found at a street market. The photograph Petra had taken on moving day, Caroline in paint-stained clothes, Clara in one arm, James in the other, laughing at something outside the frame. She looked at it every morning. David sent her the campaign brief 2 weeks after she moved in. A mid-size wellness brand, complete identity, overhaul, positioning, messaging, visual direction. A substantial project. The kind of project she had managed alone, confidently, when she was 26. She read through the brief at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning, while James slept in the bouncy seat beside her, and Clara practiced focusing on the mobile above the playmat. She felt the part of her brain that had been managing campaigns begin to wake up. Not tentatively, not with rust on it, just awake, clear, certain. "I know how to do this," she thought. "I have always known how to do this." She worked on the brief during nap times. She worked on it at 5 in the morning sometimes, nursing James one-handed while the city was still gray outside the window, typing with her other hand in the particular awkward focused piece of a person doing something they are good at under imperfect circumstances. She submitted the proposal on a Tuesday. The brand's marketing director called her on Thursday. "This is exactly what we needed," she said. "When can you start?" Caroline started the following Monday. Rebecca called her the same week with the update on the final paperwork. Everything moving. Everything proceeding. The Greenwich entities fully disclosed, the settlement confirmed in writing, the custody arrangement formalized. "It's done," Rebecca said. "As of next month, it will be fully executed." "Thank you," Caroline said, "for everything." "Don't thank me," Rebecca said. "You did the work. I just had the courtroom." Caroline went for a walk that evening, around the neighborhood. Through the streets she was beginning to know again after years away. Past the bookstore and the coffee shop and the wine bar, where she had once spent Thursday evenings with friends who had been part of a life she had stepped out of. She walked for an hour. She thought about the last 6 months. She thought about 3:17 in the morning and the monitor beeping, and the way she had held both babies at once and the quiet click of something locking into place. She thought about Ruth's kitchen and the blue mug and the 2:47 a.m. list. She thought about the conference room and the document Rebecca had placed on the table and the way Grant's certainty had adjusted by 1 millimeter. She thought about the yellow paint, about Clara's weight in one arm and James's weight in the other, and the way dancing in your own kitchen with a 3-month-old felt like a declaration. She came home, she made tea, she sat in the chair by the south-facing window and watched the street below go about its evening business, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could calculate, simply and completely at rest. Then something unexpected happened. An email arrived. The sender was Vivian Cole. Caroline sat with the notification for a long moment before opening it. The email was short. Vivian wrote that she had no idea Caroline existed for the first 7 months of the affair. She had been told the marriage was functionally over, that they were staying together for appearances and financial reasons, and that a formal separation was being planned. She wrote that she was not asking for absolution. She was not looking for anything. She wrote only that she believed Caroline deserved to know one thing. You were not the problem. The problem was always him. Caroline read the email 4 times. She sat with it for 3 days. She thought about what she had told Petra. I think she was also lied to. She thought about what Petra had said back. She's not the one who made a vow to you. Both things were true. Both things could be true at once. She thought about the particular loneliness of being the woman in the dark, of acting on information that turned out to be constructed, of loving something that had been presented to you in a false frame. She wrote back. The reply was 4 sentences. "Thank you for telling me. I believe you. I don't hold what happened against you. I hope you're okay." She sent it. She showed the exchange only to Helen on the following Wednesday. Helen read it. Then she looked at Caroline. "What do you feel having done that?" she asked. "Lighter," Caroline said. She was surprised by how precisely true it was. She had not expected the act of extending grace towards someone she had every reason to resent to feel like something she was doing for herself. But it did. The anger she had been carrying toward Vivienne had been taking up space she needed for other things. Releasing it was not forgiveness of Grant. It was not acceptance of what had been done. It was just the practical act of putting down something heavy she no longer needed to carry. At Christmas, the twins were 3 months old. She took approximately 800 photographs. She made her mother's shortbread cookies, the recipe memorized at age 9, butter and flour, and the extra pinch of salt that most versions left out, but Ruth insisted was the thing that made the difference. She stood in the yellow kitchen and followed the recipe from memory, while James and Clara watched from their bouncy seats with their enormous patient eyes. "I'm going to show you how to do this," she thought. "Not just the baking, everything. How to stay in yourself when someone tries to make you smaller. How to recognize the shape of something wrong before you've explained it away completely. How to leave when leaving is the only honest thing left." She hoped they would not need to leave anything. She suspected, because she was their mother and she knew the world, that they might. She baked the cookies anyway. She put a plate of them on the windowsill and opened the window slightly, even though it was December, because the kitchen smelled of warmth and butter, and she wanted that to mix with the cold, clean air from outside. She looked at the apartment, her yellow kitchen, her south-facing window, her 2 children watching the light with the focused attention of people who have arrived in the world very recently and are finding everything about it interesting. Mine, she thought, all of this, mine. 6 months after 3:17 in the morning. 6 months after she sat alone in a hospital room with 2 newborns and a phone and the image of a signet ring on someone else's champagne glass. Caroline Marsh was standing at the front of a conference room in Midtown. Not the same building as the settlement negotiation. A different building. A different conference room. Different stakes. She was presenting a campaign brief, her campaign brief. The wellness brand had hired her full-time after the first project part-time initially, building toward this. 43 people in the room. Most of them younger than her, some of them significantly so. The kind of room she had been comfortable in once, before the marriage, before the years of making herself smaller for reasons she had called love. She had spent 3 weeks preparing this presentation, not because she was anxious, because she was thorough, because she was good at this, and she knew she was good at it, and being good at something is not the same as being arrogant about it. It is just the honest acknowledgement of where your skills live. She presented for 24 minutes. The room was attentive, then engaged. Then she could feel it, the way you feel a room shift enthusiastic. When she finished, the room held a moment of silence that was the specific silence of people processing something they had found valuable. Then it began. Questions, comments, follow-ups. The kind of engaged response that any presenter recognizes and that cannot be performed by an audience that is not genuinely there with you. She answered everything, clearly, without hedging, without the qualifiers that had once padded every sentence she offered in a professional setting. She was not thinking maybe this could work. She knew it would work. She walked out of the conference room 40 minutes later. In the corridor, a young woman caught up with her. She was maybe 24. Dark hair, quick energy, a notebook held against her chest. "Excuse me," she said. "That was incredible. The work, I mean, but also the way you presented it. You just seemed so—" She paused, looking for the word. "Sure of yourself." Caroline almost laughed. Sure of herself. She stood in the corridor of a building in Midtown and let those words land. She thought about 3:17 in the morning. The phone she had picked up and set down and picked up and set down. The voicemail, the Instagram photograph. The way she had sat in the dark with her children because there was nowhere else to be and nothing else to do except begin. She thought about the hotel bathroom at 2:47 a.m. and the blue mug with the chipped handle and the list she had been making since the hospital. She thought about standing in the unemployment of the guest room in Westchester, rebuilding a resume with a 3-year gap, relearning a landscape that had moved without her, opening a portfolio she had forgotten existed and finding, to her genuine astonishment, that she had been good at this. She thought about Ruth on the phone saying, "Come home, I have soup on." She thought about Petra with the gas station carnations. She thought about Dr. Claire Brower in the pale hospital morning. "You were incredibly strong yesterday. I want you to remember that." She thought about Helen asking, "What were you most afraid of losing?" and discovering the answer slowly, over months of Wednesday mornings herself. She had been most afraid of losing herself, and she had found her way back. She smiled at the young woman. "Thank you," she said. She did not say everything underneath that thank you. She did not say, "I wasn't always." There were mornings at 5 a.m. in my mother's guest room when I could not see how the next hour would be survivable, let alone the next year. There was a night in a yellow kitchen in Brooklyn when I sat alone after dropping my children off with their father, and I reorganized the cabinet under the kitchen sink because I needed my hands to be doing something, and I cried while I did it, and it was unglamorous and necessary, and nobody saw it, and that's fine. She did not say, "The certainty you're seeing took 6 months to build from scratch." It is not natural ease. It is the specific confidence that comes from having no one left to perform it for. When you are building a life entirely for yourself for the first time in a long time, you find out quickly what you actually know and what you were pretending to know. "And it turns out I actually know quite a lot," she said. "Thank you." And she went back into the conference room for the next session. At 4:15, her phone buzzed. Petra had sent a photograph. James and Clara in matching green hats on Petra's enormous orange sectional couch, both asleep. Petra's cat, Gerald, an enormous orange animal of considerable dignity and opinions, was sitting precisely between them, upright, surveying the room with an expression of complete authority. The caption read, "I am taking full credit for their excellent taste in sleeping locations. You're welcome." Caroline looked at the photograph for a long time. She saved it. She labeled it, Tuesday, April. No particular reason. She would not always know why she needed to mark certain moments. She had learned to trust the impulse. She was going to remember things differently now. The years inside the marriage, she was learning to hold them without the need to decide what they had meant. They had happened. She had been a person inside them. She had loved something and built something and lost something, and all of those things were true simultaneously, without canceling each other out. She did not need a verdict on those years. She just needed to carry them accurately. On the train ride home, she got a window seat. The car was full in the particular warm, dense way of the evening commute. A woman across the aisle doing a crossword, pencil moving in short, certain strokes. An older man asleep with his mouth slightly open, his briefcase held in his lap even in sleep. A teenager with earbuds in, nodding to something that existed only for her. Caroline had her work bag on her lap. A coffee from the cart in the lobby, slightly cooled now. Outside the window, the city was doing what cities do in early spring evenings, the light particular, the buildings picking up the last warmth of the sun at an angle that made even ordinary windows look like they contained something golden. She did not check her phone. She did not plan tomorrow. She did not revisit the meeting or rehearse anything or calculate anything. She just sat in the window seat and watched the city pass and let herself simply be on a train, going home on a Tuesday. This is it, she thought, not as a conclusion, as a recognition. This, the train, the window, the cold coffee, the ordinary motion of going home. This is what I was fighting for, not the settlement, not the campaign, not the conference room. This, the ability to be simply and uncomplicated inside my own Tuesday. She thought about what she would say to the woman she had been 2 years ago. Not in the hospital, further back. The woman in the penthouse who was comfortable in the beautiful life and had not yet admitted to herself that comfort had been slowly replacing her. She would say, "The moment you know, and you will work very hard to unknow it. Don't. The thing you know is true. Honor that." She would say, "You are not starting over. You are starting from everything you have learned, which is more than you think, and from everything you have always been, which has been waiting patiently for you the entire time." She would say, "The hardest part is not leaving. The hardest part is believing that what you leave for the uncertain, unglamorous, frightening, entirely yours thing on the other side is something you deserve." She would say, "You deserve it. I have been to the other side and I am telling you, you deserve it. Not already. You always did." The train pulled into her station. She gathered her bag. She stood. She stepped onto the platform, and the evening air came at her cool and clean, and carrying the particular smell of the neighborhood she had chosen. Coffee shop on the corner. The bookstore 2 blocks down. The maple tree in front of the brownstone that was just beginning to open its first leaves in the particular tentative way of things that have been waiting for the right season. She walked. Not fast. Not with any urgency. Just one step and then the next, in the way of someone who has somewhere to be that is genuinely hers, in the company of herself, which had turned out to be better company than she had feared. James and Clara would be awake now, making the sound they made at this time of day, that particular combination of hungry and indignant and entirely confident that someone would come. Ruth was there. Ruth was always there. Or Petra was, because she had built something in these 6 months that she had not had inside the marriage, a real network of people who showed up because they wanted to and not because they were managed into it. She turned onto her block, the brownstone, the mailbox with her name on it. Caroline Marsh. Just her name, just hers. The light in the kitchen window, the yellow kitchen, her yellow kitchen was warm and visible from the street. From here she could already hear, faintly, the sound of someone moving around up there. She took the steps 2 at a time. She was almost home. She reached the door. She put her key in the lock, and before she turned it, she stood there for just one more moment, on her own doorstep, in her own life. With the city behind her and the warmth of the light ahead of her and every single thing she had fought for in the last 6 months waiting just on the other side of this door. Starting over feels impossible, she had thought 5 months ago. But staying felt worse, and so she had started. She had started from the hospital bed at 3:17 in the morning with a notes app and an instinct she had finally decided to trust. She had started from her mother's guest room and Ruth's lentil soup and Petra's gas station carnations and Rebecca Fossey in a very good suit. She had started from the things she knew and the people who stayed, and the yellow paint she had chosen herself on a day when choosing anything had felt like practice in being a person again. I did it, she thought, not triumphantly, just simply, accurately, the way you acknowledge a fact. She turned the key, she opened the door, she came home.